All right, and welcome to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Dallas, joined again with Mercy as we open up yet another can of worms. And none more fun than what we're going to get into today, following our last conversation of what is covenant creation. Today, we're going to be looking at what is Adam only, introducing the view Adam only. That's what I've come to understand for what the Bible presents. And so we're going to get into some of that. Obviously, you guys that have been coming and checking out the videos for a while, you've gone through a lot of material where, it's a couple of years now into this. You've watched me develop and grow and change, move from A to B. And well, conclusions are really interesting. And that's kind of where I'm at now, is starting to explain some of these conclusions. It's been a big adventure. It's been a very openly, I had no idea this was where I was going to land. So it's going to be fun kind of explaining what are my conclusions, how do I see things now. Uh, the book is being written in the background, so these conversations are going to be more fun of expressing kind of bigger concepts that I won't go into the book. So it'll be fun to do here. And Mercy's agreed to come along with for the ride and try to poke holes at it. So thanks, Mercy, for coming on. I get to follow, I guess, in the seat of Tyrone, who sat down to be questioned, and why not myself? So thanks for doing it, Mercy.
Uh, Thank you for having me.
So we're going to discuss. So the view would be Adam only. I'm starting to get a lot of stutter on the screen. If it gets bad, we may just have to do a quick reset. But hopefully we're good. Everything looking good on your side?
Yeah.
Uh, okay, perfect. So we're familiar with eschatology views, futurism, preterism, all these kind of things, but we're going bigger than that today. We're not really looking at eschatology or origins, but more of the whole biblical construct issue. So when we take a look at it, what does the Bible say as a whole? Why was it created? Why was it written? Does it speak to us? How does it speak to us? What should it speak to us? These kind of ideas have universally been around the Bible, and that's more of what this conversation is going to be about. Of what does the Bible? Why rather is the Bible here? Why was it written, and who is it pertaining to? And so that's what it's kind of like when we take a look at Christianity, there's many different versions. So if we just want to take a look at the two big divisions, which would be Protestant and Catholic, that's more along the lines we're talking here, in the sense of what I'm going to say is not connected in any way to any other view. This is a view which is of its own. It does correspond with a lot of other views out there in different ways, like with preteristic views, covenant creation views. But as it sits on its own, it's its own idea and within its own realm then. So it doesn't crisscross, doesn't go into other views. So it's not necessarily something that I'm going to say here might enhance the way you see your view, but more so this is the conclusions of how I just see the Bible coming together. And so that's going to start with, why was the Bible created? Now I get to pick on Mercy here and get her to speak for everybody in the whole world and say, generally, what would you say the average person thinks about when you say, well, why was the Bible written? Why is it here?
I think the number one way that people respond to that, it's a very personalized view. And people are coming to the Bible because in their mind, they're wanting to know God. They're wanting to get saved. They want to go to heaven. These kinds of spiritual questions, and they think that if they know the Bible, then they'll get the answers, and they'll end up being with God forever and ever in eternal life. And so this is why, and it's a very generalized view, it's not very specific or anything. And because people are coming to the Bible in this spiritual pursuit, they're not recognizing the significance or the genre that the Bible is written in, the processes of how the Bible got collected together, how there's many varied, authors, and the whole history uh, of bringing this book together and what all of that meant. That doesn't come anywhere in the forefront of, well, today, like evangelical Christians or in Western Christianity.
I think that's pretty fair. In general, I think it even spans many multiple religions today, as even views of people who aren't studying the Bible in general. That's what they kind of see the Bible as a promise to those kind of ideas, or just a way to God, those kind of different ways. So, what makes Israel only different, better, however what we want to classify it? Well, the way I look at it is, why is Adam only my conclusion? Well, Adam only, just like with anything, it doesn't matter if we're basing this on the text. And so if we're basing it on the text, we need to understand who wrote the text, why it was written, and to whom it was written to. And these are very, very big points, because if we don't know who wrote it and why they wrote it and who they wrote it to, well, we're going to miss out all the culture that was being instilled in those writings. So we're going to no longer know the context in which this is even written. At the same time, knowing the author gives us better understanding of when this was, why this was, who this is involving. So very, very needed information before we can even move forward into the text. And
Mm.
so that to me was where it came down to having to get into some debates, because I'm pretty sure that if I were to ask Mercy off the top of your head, how many different views is there on where the Bible physically came from? Like off the top of your head, could you guess?
Well, a lot of people just say, oh, God just these people together and magically wrote it. It was inspired, it's infallible, it's inerrant. This is the kind of teaching that we have about the Bible. And because of that, it's timeless. We don't really need to know, the specifics of all this genre and all of that background, because it's timeless and God can just speak to me through it. That's really like how we're really, indoctrinated or thought or trained to think through what the Bible is. So this topic that you're bringing up isn't really important for a lot of people, which if you actually look at it, it should be like the top thing, because any book that anybody would even bother to open up, we all ask those questions that you just, asked. But yet when it comes to the Bible, because it's just timeless, it's spiritual, we don't want to ask those questions somehow, because it's just a magical spiritual book.
Yeah, and that makes me remember, growing up, in the earliest days of when I transferred into Christianity, the idea of the prayer group getting together and just like, okay, let's just open the book and put our finger in and let's see what we talk about today. And it's very mystical, and people don't associate that word with it. And that's kind of is when I take a look at the Adam only view, we want to move away from all that thinking. What we want to do is move into that localized, audience relevant point of view. What did this mean to them? Because what it means to us is important to us, but what it meant to them is what it was intended to mean. And unfortunately, we do tend to, in our own imaginations, make things more about us and not necessarily even what it's about. So Adam only is about focusing what would it be like from the view of the person living in the time period that this system was up and running. And so that helps us a lot when it comes to identifying the author, because through the idea of Adam only, they were taught, they were led to believe, and they even said with their own mouths that the Torah was written by Moses, that all five books, that's why it's called the five books of Moses, or the five books of the law. The word Torah itself means the law or teachings. And so when we take a look at that, these were set up to begin the people of Israel. And we see that as the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, the whole Bible of the Hebrew people. After the account of the Torah, then begins the accounts of the people. So we see that immediately pick up with Joshua. Then the prophets and the wisdom literature is added in. So it's even staged as the beginning of the people. And when we take a look at what we're reading through the eyes of Moses as opposed to our eyes, we get a much different view of why this came into being. So, from Adam only's point of view, as a Hebrew living under the law that I was taught to believe that was written by Moses, I will come to my understandings. So that's the first position is through the hermeneutic of audience relevancy that the Torah itself is a product of Moses by tradition. Now, does that sound different? Does that sound like where would you say hearing that impacts you, Mercy? Is that a weird idea, or because obviously, if it's the tradition of the Jewish people, even still to this day, and for most Christians, that can't be too controversial for. But I'm sure it can't be accepted by all.
Well, it's a very conservative view that Moses wrote the Bible, and if you are a conservative evangelical Christian, definitely that's the position you take. Now, you take that position, but you don't know what that means. Right? We're told it, we're like, oh, yeah, oh, okay. But what does that actually mean? Now, no one has really fleshed that out. And that's why I like your position of Adam only in that. And that's why we're having this conversation is that you're learning or you're in your process of how to talk about it and to flesh it out in ways that maybe it hasn't been talked about before. I remember I didn't know that before I went into Bible school, when I was like 19. And in church, that was never taught to me. In fact, when I started to read Genesis on my own as a kid and as a teenager, I thought Adam wrote Genesis. I mean, that's just like where I was coming from, right? But the church, Pentecostal background, Baptist background, they never talked about like whoever wrote, the Torah or Genesis or anything. So when I went into Bible school and I was told for the first time that Moses wrote the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, I was like, what? That was really shocking to me. And then after that, nobody really explains the practicality of that. Like, what does that actually mean? Well, if we're talking about Mesopotamia, we're talking about 4,000 BCE, but Moses is coming on the scene in 140, 1,446 BCE. Well, that's like a quite a bit of difference. Like when you actually think through that, and you're like, wait a minute, and now you're starting to think like, wait a minute, what does this mean if Moses actually wrote Genesis? Now we're coming at putting the foot on the ground and walking that out in a practical way.
Well, and there has led because of those ideas to a lot of different theories. Like there's the tablet theory that there was once a tablet that this was written on that passed through many generations. There's the oral theory that this was a once memorized idea that was passed through many generations. There's lots of ideas now that somehow Genesis was written before Moses came along. Well,
Yes.
then it's not the 5 books of Moses. And that becomes a big issue because even when we get to Jesus in the New Testament, none of the apostles, even Jesus himself in the writings of the Gospels, they never debate this. In fact, they quote Genesis 1. Jesus quotes Genesis 1 to talk about, or it's Genesis 2 rather, when questions about husbands and wife. And he goes, well, why? You want divorce, but God said in Genesis 2, let them not be separated. And so they there's no debate amongst those people. So that's the view that Adam only has to take, which is if Jesus didn't fight against Moses's authorship, if the apostles didn't, in fact, they quoted it saying Moses's law, and that Jesus only came to fulfill these things, there was no angst towards these things. So there wasn't even a debate about parts of these things being okay. There wasn't. There's not one section in the gospel in the whole New Testament where we hear them complain about. I wish this part of Genesis was left uncorrupted. No, what do we find? We find the exact opposite. We find Paul teaching Timothy that all that Old Testament is still at their time relevant for teaching all truth. And it was remaining perfect. It was God breathed. So at the time of the New Testament authors, they had all opportunity to say everything is messed up. this came from here and this came from here and this priesthood started writing halfway through this letter and then this obviously came from another. They didn't do any of that. They accepted it as a whole package. So if we are to understand what's going on inside the five books of the Torah, we have to read it from that perspective as people living under it who were taught and raised to believe it. Even their Messiah was taught to raise and believe that Moses wrote it.
Mhm.
So to me, we can get into those arguments of, well, what about this, that, and the other? Well, the problem is that's not what the Bible's concerned with. The Bible's concerned with the people who believed what they were taught about the Bible. And so the view of Adam only has to stick to the position that the Torah has to be seen in that traditional view because that's how they related to it. And that's how the leaders related to them. And that's how they processed and lived their lives through it. So, yes, I understand that on the liberal side, it was a great point you made because it is a conservative view. Liberal scholarship, I think, in this argument uh, isn't really relevant because we're not really trying to debate about the logistics of these things coming together. What we're trying to do rather is understand the narrative when they were put together. Because this was the people in the New Testament. They looked at that whole collection and said, this is our source. This is what we're going off of. So if it was from their point of view acceptable, then from our point of view, we can take that as acceptable to try to understand the messages they were saying, not necessarily debate about what was the exact day, hour, and minute this was penciled and was it borrowed. And that would be, I think, the next point in my position, which is we understand when Moses wrote this, he was leaning back on a well known cultural Mesopotamian wide view of the history of the people of Mesopotamia. Babylon clearly had already established in their worldview that there was a great city called Eridu, and the gods gave them the city states and the blessed priesthood raised up within this system. But through the fall of it, it was washed out. Then they also gave the story that goes into the tales of Gilgamesh, who survives a flood and starts rebuilding society. It's very interesting that this is part of the general knowledge of the culture of the people of Mesopotamia. So when the Hebrew people come along, when they're pulled out of Egypt, we're getting context. We're getting the context of Moses. And where did Moses appear? In the book of Exodus. That's the very first place we see the story begin. And what are we seeing? We're seeing Egypt giving birth to the people of Israel who are coming out as a nation. They went in as 12 people with their slaves and their farm workers and their livestock. So the small group came in, a nation came out. The birth of Israel took place, and it was guided through the headship of Moses. And what was that all about? Them becoming the covenant people. I don't think anybody debates that. Exodus is Moses leading them out. Well, this is what was Moses was writing. That's why he could write it, because he had firsthand experience. So just like you want to argue in the New Testament that the Gospels are written from firsthand experience, that's Moses writing their gospel, which was the Torah.
Mhm.
So when we put this perspective in, we can start, oh, okay, so he's writing about their Moses, there. So that'd be like the equivalent of Jesus writing a gospel.
Mhm.
So we put that in a perspective. We have Moses writing their gospel. And in fact, in Deuteronomy 30, it specifically says, where God sees into the future at the end of Israel, of the covenant people, and says, these people are going to betray you. And as soon as you're done, they're going to go and make covenant with all these other people of the land and go seek all these other gods. So they're going to break the covenant. So write down the words of this law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant. So Moses did this. And it says, and he wrote down the words of this law in its entirety and put it in beside the Ark of the Covenant as a witness against all of Israel. So we have this testimony in Deuteronomy that Moses wrote this, that why he wrote it, and that his experience began in Exodus. So the whole story of Exodus through Deuteronomy, it testifies to itself that its authorship was Moses. So it's very important that if we're going to look then and accept that Moses is the author, what is it talking about? Well, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are all talking about the creation of the covenant people Israel. Now, I don't know if I want to labor that much anymore, but did that make sense, Mercy, or was that kind of wish-washy? Because I know a lot of these ideas aren't really out there, but might be more new than it is wrong.
Well, I think when Paul is giving mentorship to Timothy in the epistles of First and Second Timothy, the very infamous verse that we always use, all scripture, right, is inspired by God, and it is productive for teaching, rebuking, correcting, all of this stuff. People use that verse to say that all of scripture, Paul is referring to the New Testament, but the New Testament was not written down. Paul, I don't think at that time would have ever thought that his epistles to all these house churches would have ever become known as scripture. So when Paul is writing that down to Timothy, he's basically giving credence to the Tanakh, the Old Testament scriptures, and saying this has all been inspired by God. So the Torah, the first 5 books, absolutely would have been under that what requirement, right? And so Paul is saying that to this to Timothy, and Timothy is saying he's basically getting his authority what from the Tanakh, and most especially the Torah. So giving that kind of authorship, I think says a lot. And in their minds, yes, the Torah was the authorship was Moses. Um, it's just mind blowing just to stop and pause and think through that piece right there. It's wow, like how did that even come about, right? And wow, if it's coming from Moses's perspective, and Moses is actually being used by God to present what we call, the suzerain vassal treaty and the five, parts of a suzerain vassal treaty, which the Torah actually fits nicely into, then you're seeing a way better picture of, oh my gosh, this was the purpose of the Torah, and here it is presented. But we never look at it that way. We
Well, and I
don't have.
think too, when we see in the New Testament, sorry to cut you off there, uh, when we see Peter, we see Jesus talk about, and these times, talking about their times, will be just like the days of Noah. So they're going out of their way. Peter himself says it'll be just like, in the days of Noah, where only the remnant, the 8 people, the 7 people, whatever it is, came off the boat.
Mhm.
And so they're tying everything back into Genesis.
Mhm.
And so there's no way that they're looking at those documents as, well, this comes possibly from here, or this comes, their mind, this was a Moses writing. And to me, that brings a lot of significance in, because uh, when we take a look at the 4 parts, when we're taking a look at Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those are all talking specifically about Israel and the time period that Moses was alive. Deuteronomy actually ends with the death of Moses, handing over the reins to Joshua. It's also now the priesthood is being handed off to Levi and the tribe of Levi under Aaron. So there's this transition of Moses dying. So we actually have these 4 books, Moses, Exodus to Moses, Deuteronomy, with no arguments. The problem with that, though, is that brings in, well, why is Genesis in there? So that brings up the second point, where with the Adam only view, not only do we honor the audience relevance, but we also honor the culture. At that time period, there was, and it's well known today, there's the archaeological evidence in the record of hundreds, if not thousands, of suzerain vassal treaties done through Hittites and other nations. Now, what this is talking about the suzerain, who is the greater, and they would have a position over the vassal, the lesser. Now, this was common in those times because small states that were just appearing, if they didn't have someone to protect them, they were just taken over. They were ravaged by people who would just come in at night and steal their stock and supply. Or if they didn't have water, they would covenant with these people in these treaties where they would come and they would, oh, you great king, you're so awesome. Look at all your water and food. Look at how lowly and weak we are. Please come and be over us, and we will follow your rules and everything, and give you tribute, and you give us protection and water. And so these treaties became normal. In fact, there was hundreds and hundreds of these treaties going on all over the Middle East, all at the same time, because of city states popping up all over the place, and they needed to be part of the system. Because
And
being, go ahead.
and can I say that this is how they were being saved? You know, if by any chance some other greater city state would come and would want to, do whatever, it's guaranteed. He's stirring. Um,
Mm,
now guaranteed
sorry.
Christmas. Um, we are now guaranteed that we're going to get saved from the King of Kings. The suzerain was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and we are just the king of whatever state, or we're the Lord of whatever state. That was a vassal state. So this is how they would cry out, "Oh, save us, oh King, save us!" Right. So this was a salvation. It was a nationalistic concept, but it was very real because the other city states coming against you was very real, and you, in that context, if you didn't have a national identity, basically you were nothing. And if you were taken out of your territory and the land, basically you were a nomad, which means that you didn't have, protection or provision, then you were lost. You were basically dead as a people group. See, these are all terminology that we use all the time in the Bible, but we don't know how to stick it into the suzerain vassal treaty concept, but this was the salvation aspect of it.
Well, when we jump into the New Testament, we actually see that at play. Right? The Romans are in control of the territory, and the Jews were subject to them. They were under them, and they had to do what they were told. Which brings up the position, there was many forms of these. So there was the great conquering people of Rome who would make other states subject to them. Then there was other contracts where the agreement was more two equal parties of neighboring land didn't want a war anymore. So through peace treaties, these two equal kings would come together. And then there was another one where uh, they were just having a good relationship. So there would be a greater king who was over a lesser king, and they were just in good with each other. So they became subject to it. So there's a bunch of different ways they'd enter into these. Now, this is very unique in that when we look at the Hebrew people, they're the only people of that time period who used this suzerain vassal treaty system to establish their agreement with their God. In fact, what's neat about the suzerain vassal treaty is it's broken up into parts where we get to see these parts over and over and over and over and over again. One of the big parts is when we talk about how these groups come together, the way they're named, the way they're classified. So, for example, and we're all familiar with this language, when we use the example of the one where it's beneficial for both and both are happy to do it, and the suzerain and the vassal are on really good terms, well, they would actually take on the terms of father and son. And then when we take a look at more of an equal footing, we would have two lords. Then if we were to say go to like a greater king who came in and captured another, well, then we would have lord and servant. So it would really depend upon this relationship. And that's what's fascinating because these terms are universal. They're told they're based upon the history. And what's neat is then they break it down into the other sections. One that we're very used to, especially in the Hebrew covenant, which was consequences. This was the easiest one to see because when the vassals subjected themselves to the suzerain said, okay, these are the rules. If you live up to these rules, I will give you these blessings. If you don't live up to these rules, then you're going to be punished. And now it was the vassal's job to live up to those agreements, and they would get all the blessings if they did, and they would get all the punishments if they didn't. So this is the consequence section, or the oh, just left my mind. The stipulations. Yeah.
Mm,
So the stipulations are set out, and this is again one of these is in every suzerain vassal treaty system. So we see the suzerain vassal system being applied between God and Israel, specifically in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where that the stipulations are clearly laid out. So when we take a look at that, and we take a look at Genesis, and we take a look at that, it's very different than the rest of the Torah. It's not Exodus, Numbers. It has nothing to do with Israel. So what is Genesis talking about? Well, the section of the suzerain vassal treaty called the historical prologue really answers that for us, because what it's talking about is what was the history that led up to how this people were coming into a covenant? How were they coming into a treaty agreement? So when we take a look at Israel or Judah and Rome, they didn't just come into the earth united in covenant with a suzerain ruling over the vassal. They didn't just appear that way. There was a history where this people came up, became a ruling people, and this people were going through their thing. And when they came together, Rome was bigger, Israel or Judah submitted, and they had to do what they had to do. So there was a history to it. Genesis is the historical prologue that catalogs the history of God with the people that came before Israel, which eventually led into Israel being included into it. So, for example, we're all very comfortable with God promising Abraham that in Abraham's seed, all the nations would be blessed, and that seed became Israel. Nobody has a problem with that, saying that Abraham is the forefather of Israel. That's why we find them in Genesis, is because Moses is using the book of Genesis to talk about the history of where the covenant began and how Israel got included in it. And so that then tells us why Genesis 1 is talking about what it's talking about, because when Moses is talking to Israel, whom they just came out of Egypt, he's now saying to them, we, Israel, are now made God's covenant people because there was once a guy named Adam who made a covenant with God, and he was made a kingdom, and they were given dominion over the whole world. And at that time, obviously, that meant Mesopotamia. It was over that whole land. And when we get into the language stuff, we can reinforce that, because that's what we're dealing with. And it's interesting because that guy, given dominion, didn't live up to the agreement. And because of that, he fell and he was destroyed as punishment to the stipulations of the covenant agreement. However, God didn't leave it as that and took one of his descendants through his other descendants. So it went from Adam, who descended into Noah, that the covenant passed. So, what do we have taking place? We have Moses writing to Israel, who just came out of Egypt, who were just brought to the mountain of God, who just engaged in covenant agreement with God. And Moses said, where did this all come from? It came from the first empire that rose up in Mesopotamia, and God made a covenant with these people, and he gave them the right to rule over the land, but they were unable to secure that and keep it going, and they fell. And it passed to Noah, who then it passed to Shem, then it passed to Abraham, and now it's passed to us. And God has decided to make us the next people to have dominion and rule over the land the same way Adam did. So Adam was where the covenant was created, that Israel was being incorporated into.
mhm.
So that's what the context of what Moses is doing. Moses is talking about Israel's coming out of Egypt, being made covenant people. That was penned between Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And Genesis is the penning of where did the covenant come and why was Israel included into it? So Genesis is the history of why Israel was included into the covenant, and the rest of the Torah was how they became the covenant people. So Adam only, is talking about the creation of a Mesopotamian people who, if we go back to Genesis, if we go back to Moses' assertion, Adam, whom the covenant was originally created with to create a God chosen ruler over the land of Mesopotamia to keep the land in good order over the people, passed that agreement to Israel, the next in line to rule over the world, over the land of Mesopotamia. So that's the basic position of Adam only, introducing it through the vision of Torah under the eyes of the people living under the Torah and what they were told and how they believed it. So I know I labored it and I know I said it a few different ways 100 times, but I know this stuff might sound different. So I'm just being fair at that. Now I know that's obviously going to be very different for most people because we take that context. But that's why that first question of why was the Bible written? Why did the Torah, why was it even put together? It's so important for us to keep it in that Mesopotamian or Adam, representing all the humans of Mesopotamia. The land produced these people, and he was put as head over these people. That's what the story is about. Why? Because Israel's inheriting their power, their kingdom, their right to rule over the land. And that's what they're asserting to all their nations around them who know this story, like Babylon also knows the story. So Moses is standing up and saying, hey, Babylon, we are the ones who inherited it from Adam, not you. Egypt, we inherited it from Adam, not you. God is with us. So that becomes at that point a transition in the Bible, which then goes into what are the other books here? Joshua to Malachi, the bulk of the rest of the Bible, of the Tanakh, which is the times of the covenant people of Israel. So there's a very centered. This is all about Adam only, or the people of Mesopotamia only, and the one head that was created, and this line of people that were handpicked by God to be rulers over the land of Israel. Now, why do I say it's Adam only? Because, so to sum up this view, and I know there's a lot of stuff that needs to be said, but I have to put a punctuation on this is once we get through Joshua and Malachi, Joshua picks up from Moses, and now we go to Malachi. And this period between Joshua and Malachi is simply talking about the time period of Israel's rule as the covenant people. Did they do good? Did they do bad? Did they sin? Did they fall like Adam did? Or how did they go? So now we're just moving into the times of the people of Israel. Then we get to the new covenant, or not New Covenant, but the New Testament rather. Well, what's the New Testament? Well, it's Israel actually didn't do too well, and they went the same way as Adam did. So the New Testament actually becomes the end of Israel, just like Deuteronomy said. So if we keep this in context, Deuteronomy ended the writings of Moses, which ends on, which is according to the suzerain vassal treaty, the future successions talking about what's going to take place in the future is if A, B, C, and D happens, then E, F, and G is going to happen. And that's what happened. God said they were going to walk away, and they did. God said they were going to go after other gods, and they did. So God ended the covenant with them. And it was the end of the covenant. That was the end of it. It completed in Jesus, who successfully fulfilled it.
Mhm.
So we come to the end of Adam. So Adam began with a mandate, which was to rule the land and have dominion. And then we get all the way to Jesus when that was finally accomplished. And that became the end of that whole contract, that agreement. It finalized, it fulfilled. It's like saying, I give you this popsicle, and when you're done eating it, that'll be the end of the popsicle. Well,
Mhm.
they were given a covenant and they were told that at the end, when this happens, that'll be the end of the covenant. And it wasn't just the covenant of Israel that ended, It was the covenant that started with Adam that ended.
Mm.
Moses claims the covenant began with Adam, then it went to Israel, then the New Testament claims it went to Jesus, and then it came to an end. So Adam only spans the time period between the first Adam and the last Adam, and the entire story contained within is what the Bible is. There's nothing after, there's nothing before. It's only concerning covenant people. And who were the covenant people? The land of Mesopotamia. Adam only. All right, there's a bunch of stuff said. Throw out there. Go ahead and start poking holes, comments, whatever it is you want to say to that.
Well, there's a lot that I want to just have this conversation with you. What I'm hearing you say is that Moses is writing the Torah and especially Genesis to establish a legitimacy that just doesn't begin during Egypt's time, but goes all the way back to Adam's time, right? And how to do that is in a Suzerain Vassal Treaty is to establish that historical prologue. So that is just all history. What's very fascinating.
Before you go on with that, that's a very important point which I didn't get to, which is why and how does claiming Adam work? And that's because of the suzerain vassal treaty system of inheritance. So you can't just get a kingdom. It just doesn't appear out of nowhere. There had to be a reason. So when Moses was claiming to enter into the covenant with God, it just didn't happen. There was a reason why it happened. And that reason was Adam died and passed that covenant right to another. Israel, through Moses, was claiming that inheritance. They were in Exodus 4:22, the firstborn
Mm.
who was going to inherit the kingdom. So there was a claim of substantiating. That's why he went into Genesis was I'm the new covenant man. And they're like, so what? You're just a come lately leader. You're just some chieftain. We don't care about you and your made up religion. But when it becomes substantiated by the God that created the first people, Adam, well, now you have something you can live up to. Now there's a name, there's a reason. So he was actually trying to establish himself and the people of Israel on the name of the legend of the first people of Mesopotamia.
Right. And when we go into the New Testament, what we're seeing in, say, Luke chapter 3, Jesus's ministry is starting and it goes into the genealogy. Like, let me just read to you Luke 3:23. When Jesus began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being as was supposed the son of Joseph, the son of Eli. And it goes all the way down. And then all the way to verse 38 says, the son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So there is this whole line of inheritance that goes all the way back to Adam to again establish this legitimacy. So what I'm hearing,
It's also without heavy symbolism too. Like we got a Moses who comes out of the flood and he has a dove land onto him. Well, we have a baptism, which
you
Peter
mean
talks of.
Noah or you said Moses?
Oh yeah, sorry. No, Noah, you're right.
Okay.
So Peter's leaning on that story in Genesis saying there's a baptism when they came out of that flood.
Mhm.
And we have that same picture with a dove coming down to symbolize it was the end of that. And here we have Jesus and we have the dove in the middle of his baptism,
Mhm.
followed up by a genealogy. Well,
Right.
what was right before Noah was a genealogy in Genesis 5. Noah comes in Genesis 6. And what was Genesis 5? Literally, that genealogy was taken and applied in Luke. So, all the way from Adam, all the way through Noah, through Shem, through Abraham, through Jacob, and then through all the Jacob's sons, through Israel. So, Luke goes out of his way exactly the same way Moses went out of his way to claim the same inheritance from Adam. So Luke is claiming, look, Jesus is inheriting the Adam covenant.
Mhm.
Just as Moses was saying, hey, look, we're inheriting the Adam covenant. And why do they all want the Adam covenant? Genesis 1:26, and God gave them dominion over the land and over everything that moves on the earth.
Hmm.
Doesn't want that dominion?
Right.
So I just wanted to point out how important that point is that you brought up, because not only does Moses establish the covenant people of Israel with that genealogy, Jesus is established and claiming the same thing, the right to rule Adam's kingdom. So, very good point.
And I think what makes your distinct in the Adam only view is that you're actually going from the very beginning to the end. And I see that common thread, and it's very consistent and it goes all the way. So that's why Paul at the end continues to say, Jesus, the last Adam. He doesn't say the last Israel. You know what I mean? And
Or the next Adam, or a new Adam.
yeah, like Adam is done. Like you say, the age of Adam is done. And so that's what I see from a tool that you are using. And secondly, a big distinction that I really saw in your view, and I saw the hermeneutical model that I thought was very good, that the other views don't have, and is that you're weaving through this is a suzerain vassal treaty as a covenant. That right there, that is a huge one. We've made videos on this as well. But that right there explains what is actually happening from the very beginning to all the way to the end, because everyone's talking about the covenant, the old covenant and the new covenant. You're the only view that actually is bringing up that suzerain vassal treaty framework skeleton to look through the Bible through that lens, to then connect all those pieces of this is what we're actually understanding and comprehending is this suzerain vassal treaty. Do you understand this? See, no other view has that. And I think that's very significant. And when I first heard you and in your other videos and I was studying you, that is really what took, me by the hand and said, yes, there's something very significant here. And no other view has that. So I want to make that second distinction. Not only are you bringing in Adam all the way to Jesus and making it connect to one another like bookends, but secondly, you use that suzerain vassal treaty that's represented in the Bible. And then thirdly, the Moses authorship. That's very, very different, distinct, but it's very biblical. I see it all the way through.
And that's where, like, I don't want to go any more deep into this view, because I think there's a lot of stuff we need to chew on, even in just those small areas, because they're very big distinctions. When we understand that Genesis is talking about the creation of a covenant people, and it's spoken of in creation language, and we fast forward to Jesus, he also is a covenant people being created using creation language. So these motifs they no longer have to be motifs. They just become the language in which that is spoken. It's just known this is what it's referring to. And it allows us to start bridging the gap between cultural lacking. Like, we just will never understand it from their view to the degree in which it was supposed to be. But we can now start seeing this word usage being used in its appropriate stanza. I think a lot of problem with covenant creation is people get stuck in meaning this word means this word, and this word can be used like this. And the problem is we miss the big context. And so when if we're missing that big context and we sit down to read the Torah, and we want to say that the sea in Leviticus means this, but in the sea in Deuteronomy means this, we need to be able to contextually prove that from conversation to conversation, because certain words, just like us, we can use the word dog. Last night I went for a walk with my dog because my husband was acting like a dog. And I'll tell you, I don't want to be dogged by my husband anymore. But, I'll have to grab hot dogs because we're going to have a barbecue later. And, that's all I need, is to put up with more dogging when I get home. Well, which one of those dogs was the real dog? We got hot dogs. We got a husband dogging. We're out walking a dog. We've got to be able to understand.
Up with these examples, and it's like all like perfectly like lined up in your head, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how does he do that?
But that's all it is, right? It's common. It's just how we do it. Like we mix those words commonly, so we need to understand and get back to this contextual use of things. One of my favorite ones is when we're talking about gardens in Eden. Well, earth, soil, land, they're all the same words, but we can use the same words and all mean different things. I want to go out into my garden later because I want to put down some new compost on top of the soil because I need my land to get better fertility because I want to plant uh, uh, new vegetables in the earth this year. I'm talking about one piece of land here, but I've used all these different words to express that one piece of land. So we got to be very careful because where it might be that trees represent nations, it might not mean that in another place.
Mm.
So it's so much more. And I think this, again, is a big problem with covenant creation as a perspective, just like it is the same problem with revelation and futurism is we get into word studies and we find out where it could mean what in the Bible. And instead of reading them in their individual contexts, we just pick which one feels good to us. Yeah.
Or just lump it all together, right? Really simplify a word usage without really distinguishing between the, context or the background that's being used. And that's what we want to equip people with is that. And without knowing the complete context, it's very hard to do that.
Well, exactly. And without context, we have to fill in the gaps with made up ideas. And so that's with Adam only. What we're trying to present is the reality. This was written by a person who then handed it off to another person, who other people then started writing and they got added. And then it becomes a history. But before we can understand any of that, the position of Adam only is why did it begin? So when we read in Genesis, before we can read in Genesis, we must put it into the historical prologue of a suzerain vassal treaty that was created by a leader of a people so that that people can convince his people and the neighboring nations around them that they were hand chosen by God because they're special descendants from some guy in the past. If we don't know that,
Mhm.
Genesis becomes ex nihilo, nothing into prime material. That's what it becomes. So we take things and if we don't know, we just make it our own. And unfortunately, that's what's happened here. And what Adam only is doing is putting things back in its proper context. The Bible is a snapshot in time, it has a start and it has a finish. And as soon as we take it out of that and fill it with our imagination, it's talking about the start of the universe and the end of the universe and everything in between. So Adam only, its position is to let's take it out of the ends of the universe, let's put it back into its context, which was the beginning of the people of Mesopotamia and that kingdom that was promised to them being claimed by the people of Israel in 1500 BC around that area for them to be the new dominant kingdom in the land by God's choice.
Mm.
That's how the Bible began. The middle was their adventures in that babysitting expedition, and then their end for the end of the covenant. That's what it's talking about. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important to us today. It's actually very, very, very important. And this is where it diverges from a lot of other views out there. When we get into full preterism, we get into this idea of, well, the end means the end. That's it. Well, it's a much bigger conversation. God is not the God of one people, God is the God of all people. If there is only one creator, which logically makes sense, then we go and look at that one creator and say he created or she or whatever we want to call it because God is invisible, whatever. We don't need to get into those conversations the Bible's not interested in.
Spirit. Hmm.
And we can go, well, what was going on? What's the purpose of the Bible? Like, if God was God and God was true and God had an interaction with his people, it's not just something that was a thing that came and went. That thing is purposed. And we have to look at the purpose of Adam. What was the story of Adam and what did that lead us to? Now, this again is just a very surface introductory. But what was the story of Adam? What's the purpose of the Bible? And what does it mean to us today if we're not expecting some kind of end or inclusion into those things? Well, what was the story of the Bible? God took a people who were wrapped up in very low thinking of themselves in relation to how gods were. They interacted in a world where the gods created the humans so they could be slaves to the gods and that the gods could have fun and do what they wanted. And then the kings that would be able to overpower everybody else, they got to be like the gods and rule over all the other people, and they were servants, and that was their life, servitude. And hopefully they got to be semi-wealthy and have their own slaves. And that was the mindset of these people. That was the way the world was. And there was no God, what we take for granted today, which is a relationship that we walk in with God. When we take a look back, the consciousness of the world wasn't in that way. That's not how they thought. They thought you had to work to get the attentions of a God. Why else would a God stop to pay attention to you? And God took these people who were addicted to agricultural sacrifice, animal sacrifice, economic sacrifice, and even to the point of human sacrifice to get God's attention. And God took a people from all forms of sacrifice to, by the time that Jesus came, into what? Anywhere, at any time, anyone can come and be with God. Why? Because of God's character to accept them. And what was that on their part? To simply trust that. They just had to trust in God that He was good and He would accept them by His mercy. And they accepted that. They just said, okay, that's the message of the Bible to all humans everywhere. Nothing you can say or do from the Adam to Jesus, nothing they say or did made it so they could enter and stay in God's presence. Nothing they did. But their trust in God, for God to be with them, bridged all the gap.
Mhm.
That's the message of the Bible. What? That today, anybody, anywhere, at any time can meet with God. Why? Because of God's character to accept them. Nothing they do, nothing they say is on trial. Do you or do you not accept God and His character to accept you? That's all it is. I like to sum it up in this one little story. I don't know if I've said it in a long time on camera, so I'll say it here. But it's a man has a child. The child's one. And he loves his child. The child loves him. Child becomes two, begins talking, says, I love you, Dad. Father said, I love you, son. Child becomes three. I love you, Dad. I love you, son. Child becomes four. I love you, Father. I love you, son. Child becomes five. Same thing. 9 years old, Father hears a sound coming from the bedroom and goes, Dad, Dad, come here, come here. Father goes into the room. Kid's got this massive, Lego structure all set up. It's just crazy looking. And his dad's like, whoa, that's great. That's great. And the son stops and looks at him and says, now, Dad, now will you love me? And that's when the father's heart breaks because he's come to realize he's never had a relationship with his son because in his son's eyes, his son's been trying to get his father to love him this whole time.
Mm.
That's the message of the Bible. God's gotten rid of everything that it is a human would ever have to do. He's just a father looking to love his children. It's his children that don't think they're worthy.
Mhm.
So God showed us through Adam that the time period of Adam is over. The age of having to work for God's acceptance is over. And how do we know? Because Jesus came. That's how we know. Because the Bible's true. If Jesus didn't come and fulfill what God promised, then God is a liar. Jesus came and fulfilled his promise to Israel. He fulfilled his promise to Adam and all of Mesopotamia in Jesus. So, because God was proven to be true and trustworthy, now we can rely on his character and not a covenant. I don't need a piece of paper to show how good I am so that God will accept me. I don't need to swear to anything so God knows that I love him. God loves him because he's with me. Why? Because he accepts me. Why? Because he's good. I'm not. I didn't do anything to accept that. There's nothing I could do. He accepts me because I'm here. That's it. And that's his character. And why would I think that? Because that's the story of the Bible. That's the story of Adam. Adam, who was a dirty field worker, trying to appease God by working in the wilderness, offering dead vegetables and dead animals and the poorest amount of gold and silver he could make. And none of it was good enough for God. So he rejected God. But because of God's great love for him, God wouldn't reject his son and sent a way to heal his son and bring him back in so that Adam would return home and become part of his father's household again and stop living in the world. Adam was lost in the wilderness of Eden, and God saved him in the wilderness of Jerusalem. It's a picture of Adam being transitioned from this physical idea of work gets God's attention to a spiritual kingdom of just simply trusting the Father. If we don't have Jesus, we have paintings on a cave. If we don't have Jesus, we have Brazil and the Mayans, however we want to look at it. We got the Houthis, we got Africa, we got Australia, we got the Chinese, we got all these other religions. They're all just as valid without Jesus. Jesus is what makes the Bible real. If Jesus was real and Jesus was resurrected and everything went through as the testimony says, then God is trustworthy. And we can all today sit back and go, thank God for Jesus, because without him, I wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Adam only. Adam only is there was a story about Adam, and it was only for Adam because we don't want to be Adam. We want to be what Adam wanted to be, which was released from the covenant and brought into the new age, the age we're in. The age that Jesus promised when he said, it doesn't matter where you worship, neither here nor on that mountain, but there comes a time when those who worship in spirit and in truth. And that's the age. It's just truth. It's just authenticity. When God talks to you, do you listen? Are you there's nothing to this. It's not magic. It's a relationship. So either you participate or you don't. It's not what you do, it's not what you say, it's about what he does. It's about what he says. And what's great, you can't screw it up. You can't stop being his son. You can't do it. So Adam only not only does it put perspective back into the Bible and hold it into its historical position, but it also brings the message of God to every living human about God's position towards them, which is, I love you. I created you. You're here to be with me. Let's live together. And there's nothing that you can do that would keep me away from you. There is one thing in this age that can still keep God away. This is about universalism. This is a universal message. This message goes out to all humans, but not all humans want it. So at the end of the day, it's those who want to be with God who will get to be with God, and those who don't, those who are interested in self serving, those who think they want God, but really they want to rub their own ego. It doesn't matter. You can't hide from God your heart. He will be with those who love him, just as it always has been, even before Adam. God was with those who he loved even during Adam. And now that Adam's done, he's still going to be with those whom he loves. Who does he love? Those that love him. He loves his enemies, but he's not going to wrap them up and drag them to him and make them love him, because that would be rape. And that's, as much as it's funny to say, he's not the cosmic rapist. So when we take a look at this, God created all things. He put man here to be here, to live with God here, to know him and have experience and relationship with him now. Adam came to teach us it wouldn't be through works, but it would be through God's mercy. being the greater, to always show preference to the lesser is mercy, apart from any God, from any law. When the greater reaches out to the lesser, doesn't that sound like a suzerain vassal treaty? But this one doesn't have a mandate, it's freedom. So, what is the point of the Bible then? To bring us to freedom. For it is freedom that Christ has set you free, therefore, never again submit to yet another yoke of slavery. Don't put on any other work. Don't put on anything. You're acceptable to God. Why? Because He accepts you. Nothing you do will trigger that to make it better or make it worse. It's based upon His choice. And what was His choice? Well, what did He tell Israel? I will never forsake you nor leave you. So you can trust Him. That's what it's all about. That's what they wanted. They wanted to leave Adam and enter into an age where they could be with God anywhere, at any time, no buildings required, no duty required, but just simply live and be with God. That's all I'm pushing, and that's all I'm promoting. Adam only. The message of Adam was to show us that God doesn't have anything between us. We're now in the new age where we get to experience living with God with nothing between us. We're not Christians in the sense that we need to be saved from anything in the Bible because the Bible had nothing to do with us. But we are saved in the sense that when you don't know God, it's a different world than when you do know God. And for those who do know God, it is like being saved. But it's not what the Bible's talking about. And hopefully I made that distinction. We're in a new age, no Adam. So we'll get into the deeper stuff. We're pushing the clock here. But you can see that's a whole can of worms, just like why was the Bible written? It's a can of worms. But hopefully I was able to encapsulate a little bit of the beginning, a little bit of the end, and a whole bunch of questions I know are definitely going to be bouncing around. I'm on Facebook answering these questions. I'll be posting a video to this link out there. If you're watching this and made it this far and still find it interesting, pop on to Facebook. I've got a link for the Discord in an earlier video if you scroll to the very bottom. Let's get this conversation going because after all the time I've put into this, and I'll hand this over to Merci, who's been very nice to let me ramble here for a long time. Now I'll just hand it to Murray. I've said a lot. At the end of the day,
Well,
you know, go
ask,
ahead.
people have been asking. It's very what I'm seeing, Dallas, and to be part of this journey. It's a very simple message, but I know the incredible amount of work that you have put into this to actually grasp the whole picture of what the Bible is saying. And so I love the Bible in the sense of, during the time of writing, it's now recorded, and we use the Bible and to show people if they need proof. Well, here's the proof that God, like you were saying, that you and God, there is no separation, there is no sin, there is nothing that can keep you away from God. And that's the beauty of your simple message, which I am wholeheartedly agreeing with. And so, thank you for sharing all of that. That's what people are wanting to hear from the horse's mouth. That's you, Dallas. And thank you for sharing that today in this video.
It's really weird because it's true. It's not a complicated message, but it does rub us very hard because we do have a lot of ideas that are already predetermined against those ideas. So I think that's the bigger battle. And I actually look forward to some of these questions. And Mercy and I will battle around some of those things that you guys throw up. And hopefully there's a lot of questions because I want this conversation to be more than just a few people. I know a lot of people on Facebook are finding this interesting. So let's keep this going. Let's get more people talking about it because, it's honestly, I love the Bible. It's cool. It's just freaking cool. And more people need to be talking about it in this way because I can't imagine what I'm still not seeing. And I know I'm not seeing even, a splash in the water yet. So I'm just as excited to see where this can go. And hopefully you'll join us on that journey. Last word for you, Mercy.
Well, thank you. And yes, let's continue the conversation. Thank you for giving us the safe space to actually talk about these kinds of things, and that it's okay. We can talk about these things. So I love it. Thank you.
Fantastic. We pushed it to an hour and 10 minutes. hopefully that 10 minutes isn't discouraging. So wherever you guys are, appreciate you watching it to the end. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next one.